From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court-ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. To hear details about all the applications of Ditto Transcripts and exactly why this is a key solution for your organization's workload issues, check out episode 232. There are so many factors that impact the well-being of law enforcement officers, from wellness topics and developmental content to organizational expectations and social connections. RippleWorks solves that problem by providing anonymous check-ins, so each officer can get exactly what they need and want for prime performance, while agencies learn in real time how their people are doing through analytic dashboards. Take a look at RippleWorks today at www.rippleworks.com and schedule a demo. That's RippleWorks, WORX.com. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, welcome back, everybody. We frequently talk about development. We frequently talk about leadership and culture. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership development. And I'm really excited to feature the panel today on leadership, specifically with developing your people, developing the next generation of emerging leaders. So that is more pertinent than ever when we have such a young industry right now because of the mass attrition that we've faced in the last several years. But I actually put it out on the socials as far as nominating somebody that you saw, that you worked under as a prominent, promising, influential, positive leader. And it means a lot when you get nods from colleagues in the space, but it means so much more when you get them from someone that actually worked under your leadership. Because, as I said before the recording started with these gentlemen, it is the followers that determine leaders, not leaders themselves. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce Chief Jeffery, Melchior, and I want to introduce retired Captain Schentrup. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
All right, so let's start with some brief introductions. I want to know your background a little bit, what brought you into law enforcement, and I'm sure that you both have quite a smattering of assignments and responsibilities, but just to give people, the listeners, some context as to how your career developed and then what you're doing now. Why don't we start with Chief, because he's still in the game, and retired captain is looking relaxed as he should be.
Yeah. Jeff Melchior, Chief of Police with DOTD Police here in the state of Louisiana. 23 years in law enforcement. So I got into law enforcement in the wake of 9/11, like most of my age did. Prior to law enforcement, I was a young man trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I was in the military. I got discharged from the military after an injury, so it really didn't know what I wanted to do, and kind of going through life. A tragic day happened, and fast forward to 25, and we're a few days away from the anniversary here, which is crazy to think about. I got into law enforcement as kind of a way to serve after not being able to serve, and a young guy, not really knowing up from down, left from right, and landing in a way that I was able to make it in this career with my size. I know you see me in my face, but I'm a rather large fellow. I'm 6'9", about 350 pounds. So I'm not a small guy. I started in the field, if you will, in corrections, working for state corrections in Louisiana. And here in Louisiana, we have this college. I'm sure you've heard of it, LSU. Go Tigers.
Might have heard of it. Mm-hmm.
One of one of the assignments that we would do in the state penitentiary department is we would work the LSU home games, and I'll never forget it. I was working. It was LSU, Florida. It was Tim Tebow's senior year, and they were number one, and I don't remember where LSU was ranked. And I was standing on the sidelines, and I got the opportunity to see firsthand, the brothership and sistership of law enforcement, and talking with those individuals at that time. But I'll never forget the chief at that time of the police department in the area walks up to me, pats me on my shoulder, says, "All right, big fella, you got one job and one job only. Nobody gets on this field." And I took that to heart.
Mm.
um,
Ever
and
challenging rush of the field after the game, right?
we wound up LSU wound up winning, and the fans charged the field, but nobody got past me. So and it's just crazy to think that 23 years ago, 24 years ago, I was a young kid, not really knowing what I was going to do in my life, and here I sit, the head of a state agency, um, with just an amazing group of guys and gals around me. Um, one thing I want to get to later on, I'm reading a book right now that talks about a concept that I haven't considered or even heard of to this point. It's, we talk about leadership, mentorship, stewardship, or you're going to hear me say a lot of that during this, but something called teamship. And it's very, very interesting to me. And it's amazing to be able to go from there to here and to share this time and experience with you. So with that, I'll shut up and let Mike have a turn.
Solid.
I do get very talkative and very passionate about this. Like I said, Eric, you could not have given me a better subject to talk about.
No, I love it. And I'm sure one of your articles that I just saw and sent you a message about, I'm sure that'll come up in this conversation, if not direct themes from it. So thank you
Yeah.
so much. All right. Retired Captain Mike, how about yourself?
So, interesting, Chief, is that I worked 25 years in Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is. I'm a huge Florida football fan. Tim Tebow did not lose to you in LSU, at least not in his undefeated season or the 08, 07, 08. He might have the year before when he went 6-4. So I'm going to give you a little grace there. That's probably the year you're talking about. He didn't have a
It might
great year
be.
that year.
That might be. I was
Okay.
young. I was very young.
Now, having said that, the Gators are going back to LSU this Saturday, and I'm
Sure are.
praying you guys don't. I hope we have legs and arms when we get off the field after playing y'all. So it's going to be a tough night.
I'm
Anyway,
actually
so yeah, 25 years started. I always wanted to be a police officer, so different, right? From a kid all the way, knew what I was going to do, went to college, criminal justice degree, and got on with a law enforcement agency. I went to UF, so Gainesville was a perfect opportunity here. Met my wife, and I stayed. So I did 25 years, worked your way through. And Gainesville is kind of like that mid-level area, right, where it's about 300 sworn. So enough to where you can have opportunities to do, whether it's SWAT, we have an aviation unit, we had horses, we had a little bit of everything, right? Other than SWAT, field training was always important when I first started. And then detectives is where I kind of hit my groove at about year 7. That was awesome. I learned a lot there about investigations. 14 years in, I finally made sergeant. Some of that was because I'm glad it took me that long, honestly. I thought I was better than I was. I really just think my brain works like, oh, you're so good. You should be a sergeant. Like, you've been here like 4 minutes. Why aren't you telling other people what to do yet? And somebody else, God had gave me some grace and told me, you need to wait, forced me to wait. That's why I tell younger folks, don't rush it. You need some life experience. I definitely did. So, but before I made sergeant, I kind of just said, hey, you know what? I know I'm not that smart, and I need to start reading some books about how to get better. And I did. So probably 3 or 4 years before I made sergeant is when I finally started trying to say, you know what? There's some things I don't know. And once I made sergeant, my career moved pretty fast. And I made captain about 7 years later, lieutenant, then captain. But for me, leadership, the development part was always my most favorite part. I did a lot of other things wrong. The one thing I know that I did right is if somebody wanted to advance in a certain area and go to this team or become this person, That was my favorite part, helping them achieve their goals and their aspirations. I failed a lot of times when people weren't as motivated, right? That was my spot that I suffered in, because I'm such a motivated, and I'm not saying that to brag, it's just the way my brain works. I'm always thinking the next thing. And if you're just okay with where you're at, those are the ones I had to struggle with as a leader. And it's not their fault. That's who they are. I should have came to them as opposed to the other way around. But if you were a motivated individual, I would do anything for you to get you where you wanted to go. And now, so after 25 years, I run I started a police training company called Advanced Police Concepts. And this has been great because now I can take all those leadership things and mentor new instructors. So, and I've taught a lot of classes. So some of the people that recommended me were also former students who I've stayed in touch with and helped them develop through their career, or people who are part-time instructors with me that were nothing or didn't even know how to get in. And then, you help them achieve something that they never thought they could do, like travel around and teach, go to different places. So that's I love developing people. I love it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I hear that passion in both of you, and it's given a nod to some of where these conversations will likely go. And I love that word teamship, and I'm sure we'll return to that. But and I also like how in the introductions we recognize some different football background fans, but we are going to bring these very different people together for this extremely collaborative effort, right? And you hear the humor already. So that's kind of the point, right? Like we have these teams, everyone is extremely uniquely different, which makes a fantastic team. You don't want everyone to be the same. You're not going to get very far. I've certainly said many times that if we had a crew or a department of me's, we'd be an utter, like, just catastrophic failure. But one of me, with a bunch of other people, maybe we can be fantastic. So let's start with the bigger conversation of developing people, and we'll get into the nuance of leaders and maybe formal leaders in that. But just where Mike just said, with developing people, there is that kind of tension, right? Where there's some people that are very self-driven, they're very high growth needs, and it's almost like you just remove obstacles for them. You give them a little nudge, a little check in here and there, but they're like off to the races. And we've all had people like that if we're supervisors. You all have that like hard charger, self-determined, like you're just happy to kind of be along for the journey and watch their journey. But I've said it jokingly, like I was like, you don't even need me. So like, just tell me like what I can sign off on, what training, and go for that. I think the challenging part is the people that, as Mike, you said, like you kind of have to go to them. And like, I want to get your gentlemen's perspectives on that, because as a newer sergeant, I was like, man, I gotta basically elevate everybody's game. But sometimes it felt like it was really forcing something where years later, talking to some other mentors, I'm like, like if you can just help them out along a little bit, that might be really good for them. It might not be forcing it too much, and you can turn your attention towards like the middle group. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, such a good point. And one thing that I wanted to circle back on is just, man, it's got me thinking right now. Something Mike said, and it's funny. It is funny how we contrast here. LSU, Florida, and one thing I kind of want to go back on is I love Mike's point in that he was that young motivated officer who realized his gaps and said, man, I need to pick up a book and read a book and open a book and teach myself how to fill these gaps I have. Wow, I was the opposite guy. I was equally as motivated, but the department I worked in, it kind of bred this arrogance. I was that young officer who was out running the streets, and I was making, as many arrests as I could. I went through detectives too. That's where I sharpened my teeth and got into investigations. But I felt like I was the guy. I never read a book. I never opened a book. And I became what I now look back and almost despise. Is I became that guy that thought he knew it all, self-taught, self-trained. I didn't need you to tell me anything. You couldn't really tell me anything. And I'll tell you, and that was the department I worked in, and it bred that. The department bred that because we didn't do a good job in mentoring people, developing mentors, identifying people who could mentor. Leadership to me is actually, I love the word leadership, but in context, I think it's such a loose term that if we don't break down that word and really dive into it, it loses something in conversation, because the word I love to use more than leadership is mentorship, and you both said it, and that's, I would have loved to have somebody like Mike, a mentor out there that says, look here, young man, let me tell you something about yourself. You are great, but you could be so much more if you would just open a book. And I'll tell this story about my chief from there. And I don't like talking bad about people, because I will tell you this: I've learned as much from that chief as I've learned from anybody. You know, you don't always learn from the good ones; you learn from the bad ones too. But that chief walked into my office one day when I was the XO of the department. And he threw a book at me. And at this time, I had not opened a book. I had not read a book. I think the last book I probably read was something in high school 20 years before. He tossed a book at me, just nonchalantly tossed a book at me, and walked out of my office. And I look at the book and I'm like, what are we doing? What is this book for? Does he want me to read it? Does he want me to hold it for him? Am I now his librarian? I don't know what I'm doing here. And I went back and I talked to the major that was in between he and I, and he was like, man, I don't know, just put it on your bookshelf, I guess. So I did. It sat on my bookshelf for years. 4 years after that encounter, I finally had enough and I left that department. And I went on this soul searching journey, and I started to listen to podcasts and read articles, and I was listening to a podcast, and someone talked about a book that was this book that after they read it, it turned their world upside down. And I looked over at the bookshelf, and where I still had that book, it was kind of a memento, if you will, of what not to be. Will you believe the book that gentleman on that podcast said was the book that turned his world upside down was the book sitting on my bookshelf that chief of police tossed at me nonchalantly 3 years before, and it was "It's Your Ship" by Abershoff. And that was the first book I've ever read. And now I have about 100 books on my bookshelf on leadership, development, you name it, it's up there. That was the very first one. It's funny how God works, right? And
It is.
And to Mike's point, I would have loved to have had a mentor that would have taken that younger me back then and just kind of pulled the reins back a little bit. You know, developing young guys. You know, I was one of those young guys. I was one of those young guys at 3 years on the job. I didn't need you to tell me anything. I've done it. I made drug arrests, and I've made this arrest and that arrest. What are you trying to teach me? I've done it all, right? I've got the shirts. I'm wearing it right now, right? I was that guy. I would have loved to have had a mentor to have pulled back my reins and set me down and did that and said, let me mentor you. And I really think that's what we're missing in our profession is mentors. Leadership is a verb, but we often look at it as a noun. We also typically assign leadership to sergeant, to captain, to chief. But that's not what it is. And that's why I love breaking that word down into different subsections. And my favorite subsection of that word is mentorship. I'm actually going to be interviewing a young man tomorrow, and it's such an honor for me to do this. He's considering coming over here to work at this agency, and this will be the first person in my career that I've ever had the opportunity to sit down and talk to who is not a direct mentoree of me and my newfound ways and ideologies over the last decade, but he is somebody that was trained by somebody I trained. And it's so humbling to have that opportunity to look at somebody. And I don't know this individual. I've talked to him a few times in text messages and phone calls, but I can tell just through those conversations that my ideologies and what I worked so hard to correct from that young man so long ago, and the mentoring that I poured into those officers after the light bulb finally turned on for me, it's just so humbling and truly a godsend to see somebody like this and have the opportunity to sit down with him and talk to him. And I don't know what I did right in a former life to get this opportunity, but I am truly blessed to have this. This position I'm in now, this pulpit, if you will, to stand behind and preach the message of developing. One thing that I will tell you, and we can get a little further into it. One thing that I'm heavy on right now is the difference between training and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
you know,
let's put a pin in it and return to
Yeah.
that, because you both mentioned a lot on humility. You both did a little bit of a take on it in your intros, um, and even like if you remember, what Mike said was that he thought he was like hot stuff, and then he got humbled and he received the lessons in humility and took it upon himself to study his craft, go back to the put himself back in the forge, and then he's grateful for that time of refinement. And then, I hear humility there, right? And I hear humility in you, Chief, saying that what I hear is this like this next level of legacy that you're like, I got to help mentor all these people, all these emerging leaders, and now I get to check out and get to know the next line down, right? The next generation, which is that culture piece and that teamship that you mentioned earlier. So I just kind of wanted to have everyone kind of recognize that theme as we talk about these leaders, to people that I'm talking to and featuring today that have been given the nod from people that have been able to learn from them, and then how so much of their conversations about uh, recognizing a point of humility, and truly that could be a huge piece of what we're talking about today. Um, Mike, what stirs within you off of a lot of what Chief Jeff just shared about?
When you talk about this idea of humility, I realized I didn't think, I thought having a big ego was more about being very confident, right? Like I was confident. I was, then they're like, well, maybe you're overconfident. No, this guy's just confident and I'm smart. And I'm a pretty smart guy, right? But you put those two things together, it took me a long time to realize that, oh my goodness, being confident is not having a big ego, right? You can be humble and be confident. You do want to be confident, but humility is the key to learning, number one, because if you know everything, then you can't learn.
Hmm.
Humility is the key to trust in a lot of ways, right? If you can't be humble with another person, right, you can't admit a mistake. I tell people like the biggest trust building thing you can do with anybody is admit when you're wrong. Like you honestly say, you know what, you were right, I was wrong. I think Jocko Willink, and all those guys, they say humility is the most important aspect to leadership. Whether it's trust, I always put trust number one, but I do think they go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I have always had a hard time till this day keeping my ego in check. It's my number one thing I have to do every day. It's like, am I making this decision regarding this person or this conversation because I think I'm right, or is it, or am I right? Or is it my ego getting in the way and I'm not really listening? Oh, that's another thing, right? Great communication is built on humility, right? Your ability to say, I really want to know what you have to say. And we talk about mentorship, like from a field training officer. I was a great one as far as activity, getting things done. Teaching, I was terrible at listening to my trainee, right? Terrible. I'm like, I don't want you to even talk to me. You have nothing you can teach me. My job is to teach you. How naive, right? How silly, So when I go teach leadership or I talk at FTO conferences and stuff, you got to go into that car with that trainee with some humility and be able to listen, because there's a great chance you can learn from them as well.
Yeah, man. On that note, the it's you hit on a couple kind of old school archetypes, right? You talked about confidence. Like, yes, this industry, this profession, we want confidence, but then how does that manifest? And we can probably all think about an overly confident boss or manager at some point that you're like, well, that's not the stuff. That's just an inflated ego. It's not like true confidence, because it's almost like true confidence is the, walking softly, carrying a big stick. You just know what you can do, and that could even be not even in this forced kind of I guess dynamic, but in just like a values dynamic. Like if you know what you're about and you know why you're doing what you're doing, how loud do you got to be about it? How much do you have to posture, physically or metaphorically? But yeah, I also like that notion of like, hey, boot, just sit there, listen to what I have to do, what I have to say, just take your licks and learn, and hopefully don't do it again. As far as like these critiques, but yeah, when we have people from all walks coming in, shoot, you're gonna act like people from the service industry, customer service, retail, don't know something about selling a ticket, or trying to navigate some empathy and some crisis management, right? When someone's just absolutely upset that everything was wrong in their prior job, like we think that they don't bring something to the table. I mean, that is what we want to bring in. Or someone with a financial background is going to look at this bank fraud. Have at it. Like, you might see a lot of stuff that I have no business kind of finding. So I love that notion where you're recognizing everyone has something to teach you. It's almost this like Zen approach of even the difficult boss, even your difficult boss. Like, what do you have to learn from this situation? And so many prominent leaders of all ranks and roles. And I like to say that I think one or both of you mentioned that, which is it's not about titles. It's about the role that you assume. And like, how do you want to shape the people around you, whether formally or informally? But it is to say that just about everyone that thinks deeply about leadership, mentorship, had someone that wasn't demonstrating it super well. We learned a lot from our not great trainers or our not great sergeants through the years.
Yeah, no. One thing Mike's hit on, and I just absolutely love the way he put it out there, and I never really thought about it. Trust, communication, and humility all are kind of interwoven together. Um, and one of my favorite quotes by John Wooden is, "It's what you know, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts." And that's kind of really what what you're talking about here. And to your points, as an FTO is one of, if not the most important. I'll recant that. I'll back that up. An FTO is the most important position in a police
There
department.
we go.
That's where your culture starts. That's where it all is. And if as an FTO, as a mentor, as a leader, and when I say leader in that context, I am talking about the noun there. I am talking about the supervisor, the person of authority. If we're not approaching conversations with those in our charge with humility and listening, and listening and hearing are two different things. I hear what you say versus I'm listening to what you. That's two different things. Then we will never truly build that trust. So it's all connected. Humility, communication, and trust is all connected, and you're absolutely right. That's where it starts.
I would love to go a little bit more specific here. I mean, a lot of this was I imagine would be philosophical, but let's talk about FTOs, right? And so many people recognize like you are who you hire and who you train. At the baseline, that's the start of your culture. But who has more influence than an FTO? You could talk about academy, but let's be real. A lot of people are like, cool, that's like classroom academic. Now we're in the real world, and I control your fate. It's not just tests. This is the real life, and I'm grading you day to day, and we're spending all shift together. So that influence is astronomical, and there's really no layer like it, right? Even your sarge, you don't see them all day. You're not sitting in a car all day. How do you manage that? And do you have just general thoughts, both of you, on quote unquote supervising FTOs and quote unquote setting the tone for a culture where people span different days, different shifts, whether you have a dedicated FTO supervisor of the program or whether it's the shift sergeant or a training personnel, commander or sergeant that's just working day shift weekdays. It's kind of like, just you set them out and then there they go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I believe FTOs are so important. Number one, we had three. Most people had three FTOs. You'll never forget their names, right? The second most important person is probably your first sergeant, right? I mean, that first person, because they kind of like break you in, and then that first sergeant has to be like, okay, you don't, right? So, but then after that, you start forgetting who your bosses are, especially when you start rotating around. But those first three FTOs, you don't. I mean, I think field training is so important that my organization we started a whole FTO conference, right? That's been going on for 5 years now. The Southeastern Field Training Officer Association, we're having our 5th conference in Gulf Shores in 2026. That's how passionate I am about field training. And just like I said, I thought I wasn't very good. I thought I was good, actually. Turns out I was okay. I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But to your point, how do you manage them? That's a very difficult question. It always starts at the chief, because the chief has to super empower his FTOs to grade themselves, to kind of self-regulate, right? You're going to have FTOs who are very passionate about training. So that's what we did, right? In my agency, we had an FTO committee. We had these passionate FTOs like me and some others. But then anytime we tried to tell the chief, like, hey, this guy is not, or this woman's not cutting it as an FTO, they're not putting enough effort in. Chief's like, well, they're a pretty good person. We don't want to take away their $60 a month or whatever it was at the time. because it could get a grievance and we're going to hurt somebody's feelings. It starts from the top. And if the chief truly believes that the field training officer program is the most important program, that shows through, just like anything else. If you have a chief who loves SWAT team's going to have everything, right? If you have a chief of police who loves drone unit, forget about it. We're going to have the best drone unit in the history of drone units. It's hard to find a chief who says my number one. It's all the lip service, but it really does. It's top down. And then I think everybody should have a manager, FTO manager for your organization, depending on your size, to kind of make sure. And there should be a process to become an FTO. Right.
Yep. Yep. And that's tough. And, with so many
It is.
people without the volume of experience, it used to be you're kind of your pre-sergeants, but, 5 was like baby to even consider something like an FTO. You're still learning a lot. And I came in as an FTO at 5 years, and it was kind of unprecedented. And now we have some amazing people in my department, but then also others where you got 3 years, but you know how to do the basics, and you don't have all the options. You don't have all these 10, 15-year officers. They're probably in other specialties if they're high performing already, right? They're detectives, they're investigators, they're sergeants now. Chief, you're nodding your head, but yeah, over to you on that prompt and FTOs and kind of setting that tone of culture and checking in on it.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I spent 15 years at a campus police department, LSU Police, fairly large size for a campus university, 60 officers, 50 to 60 officers. A gentleman he will speak more highly of me than I will of myself in this context, because he will accredit me with being the person who taught him and trained him, and he's what he calls his FTO. Later on in my career there, towards the end, I kind of put my foot down on this and said, we have to establish a field training program better than what we have. And I pulled out my soapbox and I got on it and I refused to get off. And finally the chief there said, fine, do it. So I used Tyler Como is his name. Tyler was very passionate about field training. I was too, but I had a lot of irons in the fire, if you will. So he and I sat down and I empowered him. To Mike's credit, you got to empower people to do this. I empowered him to set this up and make it happen, and he did. He did a wonderful job. And we started in that smaller environment. Tyler was the field training supervisor. He managed the program. So when I would bring in the new hires and the new cadets, I would release them over to him, and then he would take it. I was his rubber stamp, is what I was. I was the guy that would go to the carpet and fight for the program, and I did every day. I don't take credit for any of his work. He did it all. The program that he set up there, that's still in place there today, is the reason why that department has the young officers it has. Hands down, 100% his baby. He did it. I was just his rubber stamp. Transferring over here, I think FTOs are so important that I'm a state employee, so I don't have ultimate power as a chief. I have to go through the Civil Service Commission. Well, I'm so passionate about field training that I fought for almost 18 months, almost a year and a half, developing a civil service position for my agency for FTOs. Because I believe that if you are an FTO, you are not just an FTO when you have somebody sitting in the seat with you, in the unit with you, whether they be driving or you're driving.
When you don't know how a recruit's really doing until week 10, that's a problem. TrackWired's field training management software replaces old school paperwork with a clean, automated system. Streamlined reporting, knowledge comprehension, and crystal clear performance trends, all handled in one secure place. TrackWire gives you real-time insight into their field training process, so supervisors get real-time visibility. FTOs save hours, and recruits stay on track. If you want to tighten up your FTO program, start by going to trackwire.com. That's TRAC wire.com.
If you're an FTO and you're doing it right, you are an FTO 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So much so, going back to Tyler, he was a lieutenant there. I was the chief here, and he was still calling me, bouncing things off of me as if 20 years ago we were still in the unit and I was still training him as his FTO. And I will tell you this, that guy has far surpassed me in every facet of this career, every facet. He is a better uniform cop, a better detective, a better supervisor than I have ever dreamt of being. But he still calls me and bounces things off of me because that is what an FTO is. That's what being an FTO is. That's what being a mentor is. I'm very humbled by that. I'm very honored by that. Going back to it, that is why it is so important for an agency. I don't care if you're a 5-man agency or a 500-man agency. If you want to affect culture, positively affect culture, and set a foundation for success in your department, it starts with those people who carry that moniker FTO, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whatever you have to do to take care of those individuals is what you need to do. And that is one of my responsibilities as the chief. I fought for, like I said, 1.5 years to make that happen. And now in my department, we have a rank for the FTOs. So, once you meet the qualifications to become an FTO, we make you an FTO and we will compensate you for that because that is how important it is. And not just compensate you hourly, but that reflects your retirement for the rest of your year. It's good, and to a point you made, Eric, and this is something that I've said for a very long time. If I had two individuals, on one hand, I've got this 15-year salty veteran who, for whatever reason, never promoted, whether they didn't want to promote or they, whatever reason, 15-year salty veteran, or I've got this 2-3 year, for all intents and purposes, still a kid. And I had to choose one of those two to be the FTO. I always use this test. You could call this the Jeff test. I always use this test. If I had a machine that I could put one of those people in and hit a button and make duplicates of, and those duplicates would be my FTOs, which one would I want to use? Well, I'm going to use the 2 or 3 year guy who's hungry, who's passionate, who's intelligent, who wants to learn. Because I can tell you, based on my experience, one of the best learning experiences for me in my career was when I was an FTO. Because if I'm constantly teaching somebody how to do the job, I'm also teaching myself how to do the job.
So 100%. And I think that was one of the themes of confidence for those very new potential FTO candidates and people that got selected, but they're like, man, I don't know that much, Sarge, at the time, or whatever my role was. I said, you know what? You are taking people from academy and you're teaching them to be basic cops. And you ask a lot of great questions all the time. You know where to look, you know who to ask, you know when to hit pause, like, hold up, should we get a warrant? Oh, we're asking, we probably should, right? You know all those things to keep people out of trouble. You know what's unsafe, safe. You might not be able to put your finger quite on all the little details, but guess what? Neither can your Sarge, because your Sarge hasn't done a DUI in forever, right? And so as long as you know where to find the resources, how to line them up, then that is great, because you're absolutely right. If you want all your new people to be salty and emulate and act like they got 10, 15 years on, then absolutely put them with that person. They won't have the reason to do it other than they were taught that that's what you expect, and it becomes an expectation, it becomes a reality. I do want to keep the conversation rolling because there's so many good nuggets that you're both sharing conceptually, and we've talked a lot about FTOs, and hopefully everyone recognizes that is an extremely influential leader, right? And I like how you made that nod. Some agencies, in lieu of a corporal or a master police officer, FTOs basically are that, right? They're the acting sergeant, they're the officer in charge, all that kind of stuff, and it carries those responsibilities. So if you have one of those agencies where you're only getting paid a premium when you have someone in the car, that's really not fair because they are fielding everybody's questions all the time. But let's turn it over to you, Mike. So when we talk about developing leaders, and we could even get into, when we come back to Jeff, the difference between training and development, what comes most to mind as like the most impactful themes or items that you want people to really grasp and think about?
Well, I mean, the most important thing about leadership is for somebody to realize it's a learned trait, right? It's not, I mean, some people are built more with the charisma or the funny guy, or everybody wants to be around them, or they're 6'9", we're looking up to them constantly. I mean, there are some natural traits, but once you realize like you can get better by learning, I think that's number one. Number two, we were very fortunate in our agency. We had a lot of problems, but we were able to talk our chief into something we called the Leadership Academy, which was a 12-month program. One time a month, we all got together and we would read a book. We would talk about it, and then we would invite outside speakers in, and then we would have time to communicate. And that got lots of people talking about leadership, right? Talking about different leadership traits. And that's the key. You want people to say, you know what, I'm going to go read a book. You want to spark that. You want to do a book club if you can. I've been in book clubs where we talk about specific leadership books and how that applies in certain situations. And once you have the lingo, like towards the end, I was lucky to have a team of folks who all read leadership books, and you could use the lingo, right? Hey, you could say, remember what so and so said about this? And you're like, oh, you mean in the 5 levels of leadership? Yeah, you remember that? I guess that does apply here, Cap. So that mentorship starts with, giving them a spark, making sure they understand that this is a learned trait, of course, demonstrating it as well. That's probably as important as anything else. Um, Being able to admit when you make a leadership error too, huge,
Yeah.
right? And this is how I made the error. And I'll never make it again. Well, no, I probably will make this one again because this is a tough one. And I did my best, but looking back, I made a mistake. But to have that conversation, just to be able to have communication because everybody believes you can get better. That's an important aspect to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You really underline that humility again, right? Because if you say, "Hey, I messed up," well, now you're empowering, you're building trust, and you're also telling people like, "Hey, you're gonna mess up," and the last thing we want you to do is hide it or try to inflate that ego over it.
Yeah.
Let's after action like true
Yep.
trust. Like let's build psychologically safe environments, right? And you even spoke to leadership books, like some of these ideologies, shared language, so you're on the same sheet of music, as it were. Chief, what about you?
Yeah. Another good point I want to throw at, the admitting when you're wrong, but also admitting when you don't know. So many bad leaders in my career, I've asked them questions and they've given me just an answer off the cuff, and I've taken it as the gospel and turn around and realize, man, they weren't even close to being right. So, another humility stance is, as a leader, as a mentor, as an FTO, as whatever you are, if you're asked a question by somebody under you, whether it be under you in the confines of a younger officer, a trainee, a subordinate, whatever the case may be, if you don't know the answer, the worst thing you could do is fire one off, and be wrong. Oh my goodness, you want to talk about lose credibility? But no, when we're talking about FTOs and preparing FTOs and developing FTOs, one of the things that I'm real passionate about, is defining or drawing a line between training and development. It is not the same. When we talk about training, I think in law enforcement, we sell ourselves short when we constantly use the term training, because we're kind of boxing ourselves in. You look at other industries, medical industry, engineering. I work with a bunch of engineers all day long. Doctors, they don't talk about training. They talk about development, professional development. And I was actually speaking to an engineer here about a bunch of different things, and he kept using this term development. I've got to get my hours of professional development in. I was like, explain that to me. What is that? And he started explaining to me, and the light bulb went off. And I'm like, wow. So yeah, the training. When we as law enforcement talk about training, we're typically talking about kind of everything. But when young officers hear it, or when people outside of law enforcement hear it, they're thinking we're talking about firearms training or defensive tactics training or SWAT training, or So I think if we could start reprogramming ourselves to use training and development. One thing I just recently started here is we started a subcommittee for training and development. I don't want my training coordinator to just focus on training. I want my training coordinator to focus on training and development. And when we're talking about FTOs and we're talking about mentoring and leadership ideologies and concepts, that's stuff that we have to develop, through. And I love it, Mike. I wrote it down, and I'm definitely bouncing this off of my staff. I love the idea of a leadership academy. A couple of days a month, 12 months a year. That's so profound. I love that idea. One thing we've started here at our agency was we implemented a reading list, a mandatory reading list for promotions. Now, I use that word mandatory very softly. It's, you don't have to read the books if you don't want to, but you're not going to be able to answer the questions of the promotion board if you don't. So just to get some of these concepts out here, because I'm like a sponge right now. The last 5, 6 years, I haven't been able to read enough. I finish a book, I put it down, I want to pick up another one and start running with it. But it's developing for things outside of tactical training that we need to focus on. One thing that was said very early on was young officers. I was that young officer, that cocky, arrogant, egocentric guy that you couldn't tell me what to do. And I think about, like, what would have been different had I been in a car with an FTO, with a mentor who was trained and developed around the concepts of dealing with different levels of ego, different levels of emotional intelligence, and being able to identify those things right out the gate and address those things right out the gate. How would that have changed my trajectory? Well, it's 23 years in, I'm a chief of police. I didn't get here. My road to this point was not smooth and without, hills and valleys. So one thing that we're doing here is we're looking outside the box for our agency. We've looked into both outsourcing and developing in-source material for developing our officers, our leaders, for the future. And I think that's very important, because if you box us into just the tactical side and you don't think outside of that, then you're really, really missing an opportunity to change this career long term.
Yeah. Yeah, Chief, I love how you said even outsourcing, right? Like we have a lot of internal talent. It's fantastic. But how do we ensure that we don't get inbred on our own ideas and like cross
Oh yeah.
pollinate? And that's like your neighbors, that's outside the region, that's sending people to conferences if you have the budget, or find some grants, right? Get people outside in whatever realm, investigations, wellness, leadership, like send them outside. Books can do that, right? Like that's a very low hanging fruit, low cost, arguably free, with like some audiobooks and libraries and things like that. Or you build a library in house, and that's pretty low cost. I know we're kind of getting close on time, but I do want to kind of open up the conversation on, I guess, riffing off of what just Chief said, was the difference between training and development. And I think that for leadership, this is what could come to mind for some, which is we've seen people that they could technically do the job, right? FTO sergeant, they know the things, they can pass the written test, their evaluations are sound enough, but they don't have that like leadership quality, right? They don't have that those characteristics and traits and demonstrative values that make people want to follow them. And both of y'all spoke to the charisma, perhaps, right? But also the humility. I think what was a point that was said, I forget which one of you said it, but leadership can be learned. I think it was Mike, right? Like when you said leadership can be learned. This is a discussion I've had with many of my peers and colleagues, which is also like leadership can't be forced either, though. Like, and learn, yeah, you can tell something, but it doesn't mean you're teaching it unless they're actually receiving it. I kind of want to get both your thoughts on that. Like, is that like how can you try to foster that the best way you can? Because sometimes that's so elusive, like this quote unquote leadership quality.
Well, I mean, I remember there was a sergeant at our agency who probably has read 1,000 books, and nobody wanted to work for her. She could quote every line from every leadership book out there. So it is a learned thing. You can learn, but part of learning is application, right? You have to be able to apply what you're reading, and then you have to be able to step back and again say, "Oh, I made a mistake here. How do I fix it?" So it's learning through a book. Now it's a podcast. It could be anything, and then applying it, and then getting feedback. And when somebody tells you you're not doing a good job, you don't get defensive. You say, "Tell me more," right? And then you go back to the drawing board, right? And then you learn a little bit better. We're really good as humans at doing that with things we really want to do, like shooting. Like you can come, we'll go shoot, and then you'll say you're jerking the trigger or you're not focused on the front side, whatever those things are. And then you hone your skills in and you try to get better because you're excited about getting better. You want to find people who are excited about getting better when it comes to leadership as well. But on the flip side of that, you have people who have that charisma, who everybody wants to be around, but leadership is also holding people accountable, right? And they fall on that end. People want to be around this person because this person lets them do almost anything they want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no accountability. There's no effort put forward, and there's no expectation of effort. So, and then where was I? I'm falling on both sides, right? I want people to like me, but if you weren't a workhorse, me and you probably weren't going to get along. Um, so it's not an easy path, and everybody thinks they're doing it right. And the more you kind of get away from it years wise, you start realizing, man, even 2 years ago, I thought I was doing pretty good. But now I look back and I'm like, I really could have done a better job with, especially individually with certain people working for you. Yeah, so development's important, but developing yourself is the most important. You can't lead anybody else till you can lead yourself, right? So personal development, continued development, not like I've achieved a goal, I'm here, right? I made police officer, I'm good forever. No, it's a development over the years of trying to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. How can you monitor others if you can't monitor yourself, right? Like if your house isn't in order, like your mindset, your squared awayness, and that's why I developed the lead yourself well, right? And there's elements of wellness in there, but it all starts with your mindset, your own personal mission, or else like where are you even going? Do you even know? And how are you going to get there if not? Um, yeah, Chief, over to you.
Yeah, it's such a great ending to this conversation, and it goes back to something I said earlier. It's difference between hearing and listening. Leadership is definitely, you got to learn to lead yourself first. I love that, Mike. I love it. And when we, as commanders, as leaders in our agencies, we can't be blind or we can't be naive to these what's going on beneath you too. I empower extensively, a lot, all across the board. I empower, but I don't. Empowerment is not just sticking my head in the sand and not monitoring what's going on around me. Each week, I have a commanders meeting, a staff meeting, where I tell everybody, when we walk into this room, leave your rank on the keychain at the door, because once this door closes, there is no rank in here. We're going to have candid conversations, and we're gonna get to the root of everything. And one thing I love, my grandfather used to say this all the time: if you don't like the crops you're reaping, then check the seeds you're sowing. And as leaders, we have to look at our department holistically and say, okay, is everything across the table happening the way we want it to happen? And if the answer is no, then you as a leader it's your responsibility to change that. And it's not just, one thing that we do here is we don't just have a FTO program for new hires. We have a field training program for supervisors too. It's a mentorship program. And it starts with the field training program. When we see people down with the internal in-house field training program, we start sprinkling the seeds, if you will, start sowing the seeds of leadership, mentorship, stewardship, teamship, and ensuring that those ideologies and principles are set in that context. That way, those FTOs can take some of that stuff back and start sharing it with the young officers that they're training. But then we're reviewing that all the way up to the chief's office and making sure that from the top to the bottom, that culture is being set. And mentoring here is it's just another thing we do. It's almost an afterthought now. Now I can't take credit for this. This is definitely the people that I put around me have taken this and are rooting it in it all across the state, and it's amazing. But as leaders, we have to continuously self reflect on ourselves across the board, and then I got to make sure that those leaders beneath me are self-reflecting on themselves, and so on and so forth. That ball rolls up and down the spectrum there. And going back to what I said earlier, it's training is something that needs to be done across the table. We gotta do better training, and not just tactical training, not just things of that nature, but wellness training. Making sure that those officers go home each day, they're not carrying baggage with them. That's part of the training too. So training in that aspect, but also developing the other way. You train your officers to make sure they're going home each day safely, not just physically safe, but mentally safe as well. But then developing is not a horizontal line. We want to develop it, uphill. We want to make sure that we start developing our officers to where they're climbing that ladder, to where when they're sitting in the positions that we've sat in or are sitting in, they're leaving this profession better than they found it. One of my favorite books that I read was The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and it's such a great book because we don't think about it like that. I'm never going to win at being the chief. Just like you're not going to win at being the captain or the commander. But what we can absolutely do is work in a way that when we leave this amazing profession one day, hopefully we leave it in a way like Mike did, where we left it better than we found.
Yeah. Fantastic way to summarize so many
Fingers
things.
crossed.
You did. It seems like it's going well. No, but you did, Chief, speak to the article of like actually developing, not just trial by fire, like so many people learn in different ways.
my goodness.
When they get that promotion, they get the stripes, they get the stars or bars, and it's just like, all right, here's your desk. Go forth and figure it out. And so I love that you did bring that up. But also, like, yeah, empowering isn't ignoring. It's not sticking your head in the sand. That's negligence, right? That's just choosing not to be effective. Also, I love the example of checking leaving your rank at the door, checking ego. It makes me think of, how do you actually harness the power of your highly diverse, skilled team, all these go-getters, all these, like, who you surround yourself. Essentially, your command staff is like your cabinet. And if they don't feel safe to speak up when they see something that might be off or offer their opinion, then it's like the emperor has no clothes. Like, they're worried. And to make the dramatic comparison, a paraphrase, and might have some of the details wrong, but my understanding is Stalin died of a stroke because everyone around him was too terrified to check on him because he was that kind of person, right? Which is not surprising if you know anything about that. But I will pass it over to Captain Mike, if you could please kind of summarize your thoughts on this conversation, anything else you want to leave us with, and then of course tell people where they can find you, and then we'll pivot back over to Chief.
No, I think we've had a really good conversation. I think it's kind of bounced around on some really, we've kind of stayed narrow, which I think is important. We didn't want to get too broad. I think, Eric, you did a really good job kind of focusing us because we could go anywhere because there's so
Thank
many
you.
aspects
We
to
could
it.
absolutely go for hours,
Right.
I'm sure.
So I thought that was really good. Some really good things Chief brought up. So if you want to get in contact with me, Mike Schentrup, you can go to my company's website, advancedpoliceconcepts.com, and there's a contact button there. I'd really like to kind of encourage people too to check out the Southeastern Field Training Officer Association, SEFTOA. It's a wonderful organization. I broke it away from my company. I still sit on the board, but it's a 501c3 nonprofit now, and we're going to do 2026 in Gulf Shores. So, Chief, maybe we'll see you there.
Chief, any closing thoughts and where people can find you?
Yeah, Eric, I was just wanted to thank you for the invitation here. I had an amazing time with you and Mike, taking so much away from it. And yes, we could speak about this topic for probably a 40-hour work week, right? But it's such an important topic, and it really cannot be stated enough how important it is for leaders and chiefs, commanders, sheriffs, whomever sits at the top of the table to understand how important this topic is. And if you are looking around your agency and wondering why you're losing good people, it likely is because you're not dedicating the resources that you should be dedicating to training and most importantly, developing your staff. Um, Personal development in law enforcement is always something that is usually the back burner. It's the first thing that goes. Training budget, first thing that goes, and we really have to figure a way. I love what you said, Eric. Grants, find a way to make it happen. Find a way to make it happen. I don't care what you do. Find a way to make developing your staff and training your staff a priority. And if you do that, hold on tight because your department is going to launch like a rocket. So thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Find me on LinkedIn, Jeff Melchior on LinkedIn, and I would love to have any conversations with anybody that wants to talk about leadership development training. It is such a hot topic for me, and it is one I am truly blessed to be in an agency surrounded by like-minded individuals, leaders. I'm a leader surrounded by leaders. They make my job so easy, and I thank God every day for them. So, Eric, thank you so much, Mike. Great to meet you, and keep doing what you're doing, Eric. These podcasts are all awesome. They're amazing.
Oh, thank you both so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.